it was.
Absolutely, very crucial weekend. Thanks very much, Annette Young, our International Affairs Editor. OK, well, back here in Europe, Spain is waking up from a day of strikes and street violence to expectations of harsh new austerity from the government. On Thursday, tens of thousands of people hit the streets in Madrid, Barcelona and elsewhere. Some protesters smashed banks and shops, while others threw rocks at riot police. Now, unemployment in Spain currently stands at almost 23%, and there is pressure from Europe to sort out the economy.
Livid about labour reforms. A 24-hour strike in Spain turns violent, with protesters clashing with police on the streets of the country's second-largest city, Barcelona. As rubbish containers were set alight, police fired rubber bullets to try and win control of the crowds. But by late afternoon, scores had been arrested and dozens injured. Madrid also saw massive protests on Thursday. The demonstrators in both cities determined to show the government that recent labour reforms are unacceptable.
This reform's absolutely devastating. It destroys all the workers' rights. There's been nothing like this since the 19th century.
This reform is leaving an even worse future for our children. I think it threatens everything we have today.
The new law aims at making the labour market more flexible and reducing redundancy packages.
Our staff is decreasing because of mass dismissal. The average is 35-year-old employees with children to feed. They've taken advantage of the situation to fire everybody. It's unfair.
As Spain struggles to appease jittery investors and stabilise its economy, the government says that despite the protests, it has no intention of backing down on the reforms.
Bashar al-Assad says he's fully prepared to work towards peace in Syria. But the Syrian president is insisting that nothing will change until foreign funding of armed rebels stops. Now, this comes after Arab League ministers agreed to back a peace plan that's being put forward by Kofi Annan, the former head of the United Nations. But the announcements from the Arab League at the weekend were weakened by a high number of no-shows at the meeting in Baghdad. And there are still splits over how to deal with the year-old Syrian uprising.
Calling for a serious national dialogue and an end to the year-long crisis. The Arab League has urged the Syrian regime to immediately implement a UN-backed peace plan, brokered by Kofi Annan.
We hope the United Nations will issue a binding plan that will not only stipulate the necessity of stopping the violence, but also find a mechanism for a ceasefire. The most important thing is to stop the bloodshed.
Yet Arab leaders seem divided. Qatar and Saudi Arabia have called for Bashar al-Assad to step down and said they're willing to supply weapons to the opposition. Iraq, however, remained cautious. Baghdad, dominated by a Shiite government, is closer to Iran, Syria's closest ally, and as such, relations with some of its Arab neighbours are tense. Fewer than half of the 22 League members turned up at the meeting, hosted in Baghdad for the first time in 20 years.
Iraq has returned from isolation to host this summit. It's a big achievement for a country that was punished, sanctioned, and cast aside. But now it's made a political comeback with dignity.
Earlier in the week, the Syrian government said it would accept the peace plan, yet violence continued. Dozens of people died across Syria on Thursday alone.
Now, a French nuclear scientist who's accused of planning terrorist attacks has faced court in Paris. Adlen Hichir sent emails to an alleged al-Qaeda member about punishing the West for anti-Muslim laws. But his lawyers say no harm was meant. The case is all the more worrying for authorities as the defendant was working at the world-famous CERN lab in Switzerland at the time of his arrest, and he had access to secure information.
A court date for French Big Bang scientist Adlen Hichir. His family arrived at the Central Court in Paris Thursday for the start of the nuclear physicist's trial. The 35-year-old Hichir is accused of corresponding with an alleged member of al-Qaeda's North African branch. He allegedly discussed possible terrorist attacks and bomb threats in France through email. The Franco-Algerian scientist lawyer says his client is innocent and that he only sent angry emails.
The accusation against Adeline Hichard is that he exchanged comments through the internet with somebody he absolutely didn't know. And I hope that that will be at the heart of the trial. These were comments that didn't go any further and remain just words.
Hichard was working for the European Organization for Nuclear Research when he was arrested in 2009 after police intercepted his emails. The physicist's brother says the case has been skewed by anti-Muslim sentiment in France.
This file was tampered with by the French intelligence agency. Some people see a terrorist threat from this man they see only as Algerian, Muslim and a nuclear physicist.
Hichard has been in preliminary detention for more than 2 years and faces 10 years in prison if found guilty.
There have been gruesome scenes at a prison in Honduras, with police confirming that at least 13 people died when inmates rose up against guards. One person was reportedly decapitated, while others died in a fire. Now, the situation's now under control, but it does raise serious questions about the state of Honduras's penal system. This uprising comes just 6 weeks after a similar incident at another jail ended with 361 people dead. New satellite pictures have emerged which show North Korea is going ahead with plans for a rocket launch, this in defiance of international condemnation. Pyongyang says it's going to fire the long-range missile with a working satellite attached towards the south. Well, Japan is vowing it will shoot it down if it poses a threat. North Korea is known to have nuclear weapons, but insists that this launch is entirely peaceful. The Burmese pro-democracy icon Aung San Suu Kyi says that this Sunday's historic vote is neither completely free nor fair. But she's insisting she is determined to win a seat all the same. Sunday's by-election is a crucial step as Burma's ruling military junta tries to show it's on the path to democracy. Aung San Suu Kyi has listed election irregularities which she says go beyond what is acceptable for democratic elections.
I don't think we can consider it a genuinely free and fair election if we take into consideration what has been going on for the last couple of months. But still, as we wish to work towards national reconciliation, we will try to tolerate what has happened, and we hope that the courage and resolution of the people will overcome the intimidations and other irregularities that have been taking place.
Now, the frontrunner in the US Republican nomination race, Mitt Romney, has got the backing of a former president. George Bush Sr. has come out publicly in favour of the millionaire former Massachusetts governor. Romney's already leading in the polls and in Republican primaries, with just 7 months to go until the presidential election. Now, new video footage has thrown fresh light on the case of a teenager who was shot dead in Florida. Trayvon Martin was killed by a neighbourhood watch captain in February. He had been to the shops to buy sweets and drinks and had no weapon on him at the time. Now, his killer, George Zimmerman, says he acted in self-defence, but Trayvon's family say the surveillance footage shows he suffered no injuries.
February 26th, Sanford, Florida. Moments earlier, George Zimmerman shot and killed teenager Trayvon Martin. A lawyer for Zimmerman said he suffered a broken nose and a wound on the back of his head, serious enough for stitches. But Martin's family says this surveillance footage from the Sanford police shows no evidence of his alleged injuries. A lawyer for the family said the video is proof that Zimmerman should be held accountable.
And we are going to demand justice, that George Zimmerman is arrested.
Rallies calling for Zimmerman's prosecution have been held across the country, from New York to California and here in the capital, Washington. Many protesters feel the shooting was racially motivated. Zimmerman was protected by Florida's controversial Stand Your Ground law, which allows people who feel threatened to use deadly force. A grand jury is weighing whether to charge Zimmerman and will begin hearing evidence on the case April 10th.
Now, they normally make headlines for their cult products like iPods and iPads, but now Apple's treatment of its workers in China has got the company back in the news for more negative reasons. It's been accused of turning a blind eye to maltreatment of workers at contracting firms. Apple has now got an independent body called Fair Labor Association to audit its practices. It's produced a rather damning report.
It's a first for Western companies doing business in China. After facing mounting criticism that its supplier Foxconn mistreated workers, Apple brought in the NGO, the Fair Labour Association, to do an audit of conditions in Foxconn factories. The FLA has released its findings, and Apple has promised to act on them.
We found about 50 findings. Some of these are violations of the Apple Code and the FLA Code of Conduct. Some of them are violations of the labour law. And some are just areas of weakness. They're gaps in the management systems which represent a risk of a non-compliance.
Foxconn, a Taiwanese company that makes Apple devices such as the iPad and the iPhone, has promised to cut the working week to 49 hours, improve worker safety and clamp down on illegal overtime. It will also hire tens of thousands of new workers and raise salaries, something the FLA says will have a knock-on effect on labour conditions in China.
Given that Foxconn and Apple have now decided to raise the bar and rather dramatically improve conditions for workers, other factories are going to start losing workers. Workers are going to choose to go and work at Foxconn. You work less and you get the same money, and you get time to spend it.
Apple, whose CEO Tim Cook met China's Vice Premier Li Keqiang this week, has been keen to deflect bad publicity from reports of worker mistreatment at Foxconn. It says it intends to conduct business in China in a law-abiding and honest manner.
A reminder for you now of our top